The Milwaukee Handicraft Project was one of the most innovative and groundbreaking Works Progress Administration-sponsored projects in the country. Operating from 1935 until 1942, the project employed over 5,000 unskilled minority and non-minority women to produce beautiful and useful toys, books, quilts, and other handicrafts. In 1929, the economic turmoil of the Great Depression hit Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Between 1929 and 1933, over 25% of the city was unemployed, and economic insecurity for people was the most critical issue facing the city. Although the city of Milwaukee, under the leadership of Socialist Mayor Daniel Hone, and Milwaukee County created a series of local jobs programs employing thousands of residents, it became difficult for the city and county to provide the money for these programs. On May 7, 1933, in his second fireside chat, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt announced the federal government was setting aside $500 million to create several government work programs, including the WPA, or the Works Progress Administration.
Our next step in seeking immediate relief is a grant of $500 million to help the states and the counties and the municipalities in their duty to care for those who at this time need direct and immediate relief.
The WPA projects in Milwaukee were federally produced projects that gave work to people that needed training and or jobs during the great years of the Great Depression. It was very important for Milwaukee because we had a very high instance here of unemployment, and it was very necessary for Milwaukeeans to rebuild a lot of infrastructure.
Of modern, scientifically correct sewage systems, which often replace antiquated systems.
So we needed new streets, we needed to channelize our rivers and lakes, and we needed to get a lot of people back to work. Something like our WPA Handicraft Project actually taught a lot of people how to enter the workplace again.
The Works Progress Administration was launched late in 1935 as the key agency in the federal work program to employ able people from relief roles. Projects were inaugurated and sponsored by local officials who also subscribed local funds.
The WPA was the largest government-funded federal works program of the Great Depression. All WPA programs required a local sponsor to propose and provide 25% of the funding needed for a local program. WPA projects were created in hundreds of communities across the country and employed thousands of unemployed men and women. 6 months after the WPA program was announced, the city and county of Milwaukee had submitted and had numerous projects approved. According to Jobs for Workers on Relief in Milwaukee County from 1930 to 1994, the first city projects were approved in September 1935, and within 4 months, the city had over 12,000 workers employed on projects. Most WPA projects were targeted at men who were considered the main breadwinners for their families. However, the Milwaukee County Department of Outdoor Relief classified 2,600 women as their family's breadwinner. The Milwaukee Handicraft Project solved this problem. In 1935, Hillary Clinton, a former Milwaukee newspaper reporter and director of the Milwaukee County's Women's Division of the WPA, contacted Elsa Alchbrit, a well-known professor of art at the Milwaukee Teachers College. Clinton proposed the idea of training unskilled women to produce simple but useful handicrafts to be sold to public institutions. Alchbrit disagreed. She was not interested in having women produce simple, functional objects, but demanded that the project produce high-quality, functional pieces of art. This conflict between Clinton and Alchbrit resulted in a compromise. The project would train unskilled women, but the woman would make high-quality pieces of art. According to WPA Milwaukee Handicraft Project curator Jackie Schweitzer of the Milwaukee Public Museum, the art is what makes the project unique.
The materials that the Handicraft Project made were really well made and well designed so that the public could also kind of gain art appreciation through Milwaukee Handicraft Project pieces. My favorite Milwaukee Handicraft Project toy is this wooden pull toy giraffe. I just really like it because it's a neat design and kind of speaks to children playing with this in the 1930s. It's just kind of whimsical to me. All of the wooden toys were actually designed on the project by project workers, And another thing I love about the wooden toys is that they were all tested in the classroom for durability.
Ultimate would lead the project, and her unemployed future art teachers would design the objects and train the workers. These objects featured dolls, furniture, toys, books, costumes, napkins, and tablecloths, and all sorts of different cloth items. Most of these were made out of recycled materials and factory discards, such as paper, cloth, and even burlap bags.
Some of the most interesting pieces in the collection, I think, are the dolls, the 22-inch dolls, because they're a completely unique design made on the project. One of the more rare pieces we have here is this doll head mold, and this was used to make the face of this doll. And the way they did that was to take 3 layers of material called balbriggan to make this cloth face. They would starch it and then press it into this mold, and then they sort of have the formed face, which they would then kind of mold into a head and then paint it and varnish it for durability. So that's how that doll face was made. And I think it's pretty neat because all of the products sold on the Handicraft Project were sold for the cost of their materials. So by using an inexpensive material to make all the parts of the doll, they could sell it really inexpensively. So like this doll here would have sold for $2.25 with its 6-piece outfit.
Another example of a conflict in the Milwaukee Handicraft Project and other WPA projects was deciding if black and white workers should work separately or together. This conflict resulted in the compromise that black and white workers would work together.
I'm Elsa Orbers. I was the organizer of the WPA Handicraft Project in 1935. We were planning on 250 women, and then when Mrs. Clinton said, "Do you object to having Negroes on the project?" I said, "Not by all means. I'd like to have them." So before the end of the week, the first week, there were 900 people there.
Most workplaces were segregated at that time, and the WPA actually assigned 300 African American workers to the Handicraft Project and assigned a separate workspace for those workers. But Elsa Albrecht and Mary June Kellogg decided to integrate those workers into the regular workforce.
Not only was the project integrated, but the project also produced a few items that reflected African American culture, such as the doll. The project produced several dolls that were African American. Another example of a conflict in the Milwaukee Handicraft Project and other WPA projects was who could buy handicrafts, as the project could not sell to private industry. The compromise was that handicrafts would only be sold to public institutions like hospitals, schools, or orphanages. The WPA wanted to make sure the project did not undermine private industry.
The project was really sort of a compromise between work in the private industry and work in the public. So WPA projects had to not compete with private industry. So the Handicraft Project really had to be careful who they sold their products to and how they sold them. All of them were sold for the cost of their materials. Basically, they just wanted to recoup the costs. And they only sold to public institutions and publicly funded institutions. And that was key to not competing with private industry.
Ending in 1942 due to the increased employment opportunities made available by the United States entrance into World War II, the project had a profound effect on the woman.
I think most of the workers were, sad to see it go. They had developed when the project closed, I think they were disappointed to have to leave. They had a real camaraderie, it seems, that it developed on the project. They wrote their own newsletters so they could update each other about their lives. The Harriet Pettibone Clinton, the district director of the WPA, even provided a nurse for the project because so many people were malnourished and sick, when it came to the project. They had book lending libraries where they shared books among themselves. So I think the sort of community that developed on this project, people were probably, pretty sad to see that go.
The Milwaukee WPA Handicraft Project gave overlooked individuals not only the means of earning a living at the height of the Depression, but trained them in skills that would see them through the ensuing years. If even one item from this far-reaching, compassionate project hadn't survived, the descendants of those who kept their families fed and clothed during the worst economic catastrophe in U.S. history would be tribute enough to these dedicated workers.